I think one of the first pieces of advice that I would give to anyone in any sector of their career is to invest in your network early and often. I think too many people, we see it on LinkedIn, we see it in our DMs, we see it in our phone calls all the time. Too many people wait until they need their network to invest in it. And what I have found, like time and time again, is the more that I give to my network through my time, my ideas, my perspectives, my content, my lessons, my learnings, whatever the thing might be, the easier it is for my network to be there when I have an ask.
Welcome to Multifamily Excellence, the podcast that explores the ever-evolving world of the multifamily industry. I'm your host, Jonathan Treble. In each episode, I'll spend time with a world-class multifamily leader to learn how they're continuously pushing boundaries for excellence. You'll get to hear their perspectives on career progression, leadership philosophies, and strategies for operational excellence. Hello and welcome to another episode of Multifamily Excellence. This episode is brought to you by my company, With Me. With Me makes people's lives better every day through convenient, technology-enabled amenities for the multifamily apartment industry and beyond. Today, I am excited to delve into the experiences and insights of Mike Wolber, Chief Sales Officer at Apartment List. Apartment List is a cutting-edge online rental marketplace focused on simplifying the home finding process. Mike has built a remarkable career in the multifamily industry since 2015, holding key positions at companies including G5, Rent Dynamics, Entrata, and most recently Apartment List, where he is the Chief Sales Officer. Mike is also the creator and host of the Modern Multifamily Podcast, one of the leading podcasts in our space, which aims to bring innovation and inspiration to the industry through engaging conversations. Mike, it's a pleasure to have you on the show.
Thank you a ton for having me, Jonathan. Honestly, I am thrilled to be here with you today.
And this is really fitting, and it comes full circle for me. You were the first podcast that I ever went on in our industry, and now you're on my podcast. Look at that.
Got to take it. The boomerang effect is real, isn't it?
It is. Well, for the format of my podcast, I'm seeking to really uncover your leadership journey from the very beginning of your career into where you are now, which is in a really admirable position as Chief Sales Officer at Apartment List. And you are one of the very first vendor leaders that I'm having on the show. I've had 7 C-suite level executives on the operator side, and up until now, no vendor leaders. So really honored to have you on. Your journey is remarkable, not only in multifamily, but before that at Nike. So let's get started in talking and unpacking your career. Why don't we go all the way back? Let's go even to college or high school, if there were any transformative experiences there. Why don't you walk us through what was the formation of Mike Wolber in those early years when you were just discovering what it was you wanted to do with your life?
Yeah, it's fun to rewind it back. I was born in Oklahoma, but pretty quickly moved to Alaska. I was there from 3 to 18. And I think if you rewind back to the early years in Alaska, I grew up in a household where my dad was a real estate agent. And today he is the number one broker in the entire state across residential and commercial. And I grew up watching, I think, 2 really interesting things that have created part of the trajectory that I think I found in my career personally. The first is hard work. You watch someone who's has to build a business off of their last name. Real estate is no joke. That was one thing, just like watching what hard work looked like front row. My dad grew up very poor and has now found a lot of success. That's like the first thing. The second one is that it was real estate. I grew up watching and understanding what real estate looks like for personal finances, for long-term security, very much an entrepreneurial, sales-focused profession and career. And here I am years later and sitting at the intersection of technology and real estate. Probably a lot to be said for the things I learned from my parents, but also chasing passion and energy, which has definitely been a big part of my career.
Wow, that's a remarkable example. And I have to look up your dad. It sounds like he has quite an interesting business. Now let's talk about you were in Alaska from 3 to 18. How did you decide to go to college? What did you study? What was that journey like?
Yeah, I think my generation, I'm 36. There wasn't really a lot of debate on if you were going to go to college or not. It was a foregone you're going. And I think it's cool. That narrative has changed a little bit. You're seeing a lot more businesses being born out of the dorm room or even before the dorm room now. I think that narrative has definitely shifted a little bit. But there was one thing I knew, which is I did not want to stay in Alaska. No hate against the state, but I really wanted to go experience professional basketball and concerts and restaurants and things that Alaska, which was a very isolating experience as a kid, didn't offer. And aside from that, I wasn't overly selective. Spent a lot of time looking at business programs across Colorado, Washington, Oregon. Ideally, would be one flight away from home, but knew I wanted to be either in the Pac Northwest or at least somewhere in the lower 48. And I ended up finding a great school, liberal arts school in Portland. It was a box checker across the board called George Fox University. And college aside, I think it taught me a lot of lessons around networking. And ultimately, George Fox was the single reason that I found Nike, which is where my career was really born.
Right. And I had never heard of George Fox, but a lot of those great liberal art universities or colleges, really, you may not have heard about it unless you're from the region. And
Yep.
I'm from the Northeast. We have tons of those schools. And if I could do it all over again, maybe I would have done one of those because they seem like remarkable places. Tell us about your first steps into Nike. So George Fox sounds like maybe was a conduit there, but walk us through that thought process in joining Nike.
Yeah, you can certainly relate. Like, there's a lot to be said about the power of your network. And I learned that early on as a senior, getting ready to graduate. And we had an opportunity in the business program for any graduates to go participate in a competitive network and interviewing opportunity at Nike. We had an alma mater, or excuse me, an alumni who was at a senior director level at Nike. And she was looking to place 2 1-year interns, like temp positions at Nike. And every single one of the business graduates raised their hand. And so about 110 of us shuttled out to Beaverton, Oregon over the course of a week. I had an opportunity to interview for 30 minutes with 2 director level roles. And remembering that there are 2 positions available and over 100 of us applying for it, it was like my first like really competitive business opportunity to demonstrate preparation, to demonstrate desire, to demonstrate a lot of the things that come through, I think, when you work with top performers. And was really fortunate to get that job and change the trajectory of my life. Within a month, I went from plans to go back to Alaska to take over my dad's real estate business to finding an apartment and starting work in May of 2010.
Wow, remarkable. And the brand name that Nike gives you, right, must have opened at least a couple doors after that. And let's talk about how you got that job, right? I know this was your first job, but oftentimes I'm asked for advice on interviewing. I'm sure you are. Tell us more about double click into expressing your desire and showing your preparation in an interview. Anything jump out from even those first 2 interviews at Nike?
Yeah, I think if I look back on it, there are 2 things that like really stand out that I still talk about, I still teach on, I still look for when I'm hiring now is someone who's hired probably close to 100 people in my career. The first thing is obsessive preparation. I think a lot of times people think they're prepared, but there's a humongous difference between like the table stake preparation and what world class prep looks like. And I'm talking understanding who the people are that you're talking with, the careers they've had, what the role looks like, what the career path looks like, what the alumni from that function are now doing. I went out there multiple times to network with people that were at Nike before to prepare, to make sure that I knew the language, I knew what they were looking for, understood the culture. I was reading books at the time. Podcasts weren't as big as they are now. So I was listening to radio recordings. I was studying anything online I could find. I was being a sponge, which is one of Nike's core values. And I used that as the way to demonstrate the desire to be there, which is the second. Like the first was obsessive preparation, Jonathan. And the second is even in this day, I'm interviewing 5 to 10 candidates a week currently at Apartment List. What's really important to me is that when I'm talking to someone, they really want to work for me
Mhm.
or they really want to work at the company that I'm at. And I think desire is such an incredible way to demonstrate preparation, but the fact that I really want to be a part of your team. And I think those two things came through quite well during the process. And I was fortunate to be one of the two that were selected.
Remarkable. Yeah, obsessive preparation. I agree. It always blows me away when somebody has consumed all of our content, has listened to me and my podcasts, right? Like that. There's very few that actually do that, right? And I think it's good advice for people who are interviewing or planning to in the future. Now you held, from what it looks like, several positions at Nike and just about a 5-year run there. What was the growth like in your career in those early days?
Yeah, so I had technically had 5 different promotions in 5 years. LinkedIn tells a different story just because I blended some of the titles, but I went from temp to analyst to senior analyst into management. Early innings, if I'm being really honest, I hated the job. I was data entry. It was very mindless. I was asked to copy and paste data from an MS-DOS platform into a product creation platform. This is
Mhm.
before integrations were what they are today. That function no longer exists at Nike. And I'll never forget, Jonathan, it's the end of my first week and the job is just like mind numbing. I'm copy and pasting, living on caffeine and iTunes.
Mhm.
And I asked my boss, his name's Josh, and I said, Josh, what does it look like to get promoted into work that is more strategic or creative or like something? I'm a graduate. I think I'm the ish at this point. He said, oh, it takes a year. It'll take you a year, do the work, and then there will be opportunities for you. So over the weekend, I'm like thinking, and again, this is where like the athlete in me comes out. I love competition. I think you're always competing at work. I remember asking Josh during my one-on-one the following week, what's the best week anyone's ever had in terms of data entry rows? And I don't remember the number. It was probably like a thousand entries.
Mhm.
I probably worked a week for the next month and just crushed. And I was 10xing my colleagues. And within a month, I was promoted into a full time role and changed it at Nike for like two reasons. One, I learned that if I outperformed, like management would recognize.
Yeah.
And the second thing is I realized that like the more you applied yourself, you could actually change your outcome. I had just been told it was going to take me a year. And here I was a month down the road being promoted. So that was like the first meaningful inflection of my career, realizing how much control we have trajectories.
It's really an amazing thing to learn, right? To be in that position and see your own growth and see that you're in control of it. I've seen that happen at orgs that I was at before with me. I've seen it out with me. Did it myself in those early days. I love the saying, talent always rises. And I think it's so true.
Yep.
If you are talented and you apply yourself, you seek the opportunities, there's no limit, really,
Yep.
all the way up to the C suite, as you've shown and as other guests on the show have shown. Now, let's talk about your next career step, which is your official entry into multifamily. So, tell us, how did you end up at G5? What was that process like going from Nike to G5? I think this is always an interesting question folks have. How do you get into multifamily, or how did you? So, what's your story?
Yeah, so I have to get a little bit personal with this one because I really picked Bend before I picked G5. My wife and I met in 2010. We got married in 2014, and we did a destination wedding in Bend, Oregon. About 150 of our closest family and friends flew in. It was a crazy day. I've told you the story about the wedding and the fire, and we went viral. It was a nutso story I'd love to tell in another podcast. But ultimately, we fell in love in Bend
Mhm.
and fell in love with Bend. And about a year later, it's 2015. I'm working for a manager that I really did not gel with and was doing work that was important. I was getting paid very well, but the work was not stimulating me to the degree that I wanted to be stimulated. And so my wife and I had a series of conversations about like, why wait? And why not find a way to get to Bend now? And so randomly sat down at my parents' house over Christmas and in December of 2014 picked up an article on Outside Magazine of the top 100 places to work, where Outside Magazine is prioritizing places that have beautiful access to the outdoors
Mhm.
and great career opportunities.
Mhm.
And in the top 20 was a company called G5, headquartered in Bend, Oregon, in multifamily tech, again, real estate and technology. And I got to, for the second time in my career, learn what it looks like to network your way into a role this time for a role that I wasn't quite qualified for. But ultimately, we got the team to say yes, and we made the move in March of 2015, and that's where the multifamily Mike was born.
Wow, I that might be the most intentional step into multifamily I've heard
Yep.
so far. And tell me about, yeah, I think that's so interesting. Double click into, how did you reach out to G5? Was there a specific role you were applying to? How did you network your way in?
So it's funny. In January of 2015, I cold applied for a position. It was a sales engineer. On paper, I was not qualified at all. I'd never carried a quota. I'd never worked in a sales organization. I had never had to travel for work, like a lot of the requirements and experiences that they were looking for. But if you read through the job description, I had all of the soft skills they were looking for. They were looking for someone who could take control of conversations, who could lead presentations and demos, who understood enterprise technology. And that had been my life at Nike for 5 years, working Informatica, Tableau, SAP, Oracle. So I applied, but knew that I was going to get passed on because I was not a box checker for this
Mhm.
role. And at the time, I wasn't even on LinkedIn. I did not even have an account in 2015.
Wow.
So I actually called my uncle who lives here, my dad's twin brother, and I said, "Hey, Greg, any chance anyone who works at this company called G5?" And sure enough, he had done a deal. He's in real estate as well for one of the designers.
Oh,
So get the guy's cell phone number, cold call him, and sparked a 30-minute meeting and showed up, I think, enough. We connected on running, a couple personal things, again, relentless research. I knew how to connect with this guy and ultimately got him to intro me to the SVP of sales. And then that's where the magic happened because once
okay.
me and CJ met in person,
Oh,
it was a
nice.
match made in heaven.
All right, CJ. Yeah,
Yep.
so I know him. So what, did you work directly for CJ at with this role, or
Yep. Yeah.
yeah?
CJ hired me in 2015, eventually promoted me into director level, and then eventually moved into a VP role. And then when CJ transitioned out, I took on all of multifamily. So that's how I stepped into the bigger multifamily revenue focused positions during the back half of my time there.
And we should say for the episode that this is CJ Edmonds, who went from G5, I think, directly to Smart Rent, right?
Yep. And now he's running revenue for Conversion Logics, a really cool digital marketing company in the space.
Wow, fantastic. So tell me about your growth at G5. You gave us the bookends, but what was it like in
Yeah.
the middle there?
Changed my career. G5 was far and away like the impactful chapter. It's fun now because every chapter I've had has felt like it's been more impactful, but couple incredible lessons. Joined in, it was April of 2015, but we made the move in March. And 3 months later, the business transacted 100% to private equity. We sold from a smaller firm called Volition, and we transacted for 75 million into a bigger fund called Peak out of Pennsylvania. And so I got to experience private equity backed hypergrowth. We just about 6x'd the business over the 6 years I was there. I got to learn how important it is to speak revenue. And so really saw early that like the founder, the CEO, the executive team were spending maximal amount of time on growing the business, both in bookings and in revenue, and knew that I had to align myself to those functions if I wanted to have a shot at growth in this business. And it was 6 years of networking and travel and product and growth and business. And it's definitely where like the multifamily version of me was born and found all of the amazing connection I found with the industry. But it was a very transformational 6 years.
And looking at your resume, I imagine this is the transformational part of your career where you stepped into being a leader.
Yep.
Tell us about how you learned leadership.
Yeah, trial and error was probably a big part of it. And I think a big part of it was right place, right time. I was definitely in a position to be promoted potentially before I was even ready, but it was right for the business for me to step into leading teams. The first time I stepped into leadership was 2016. I was promoted from being a peer of my team on the sales engineering function to running the function. And so then I go from peer to supervisor of a team of 7 that I scaled to about 15. And from there learned a lot around managing quota at a higher level, and ultimately started running a sales and account management organization of about 35, 40 people. I think early, Jonathan, I found a lot of energy around helping others outperform and helping others achieve their potential. And I think for a lot of the right reasons, here I am almost 10 years later, finding maximal energy and joy in the world of leadership. It's definitely a huge part of what keeps me going.
Awesome. Now, your step from G5 to Rent Dynamics came, I think, in 2020, right?
Yep.
And 2020 was a momentous year for the whole world. Tell us about that transition.
Yeah. So my belief, and this is wisdom I've received from mentors, it's not my quote, but it's definitely a quote I believe in, is that one of the best things you can do when you're looking to make a change is be open to making a change before you've hit the peak in your role or in your time at the business, because you bring better energy, better discussion, and a more open ended perspective to talking to potential hires when you're actually not looking for work. So I've always had a always open mindset. I think it's a mutual responsibility between me and my employer that I'm engaged and I'm retained. But I was taking conversations like I always do and networking in the summer. And I was actually sitting at a pool in Palm Springs with my wife for her
Mm.
40th birthday in September of 2020 when I got a call from the co founder of Rent Dynamics. And they were thinking about really looking to accelerate growth. And is there ever a world where we could maybe make something work, where we could get you out to Utah and we could really take a crack at growing this thing?
Mm.
And that conversation turned into a couple hour long Zoom calls, a couple trips down there to spend time with the team. And I ultimately joined full time as chief revenue officer in December of 2020. And we had a hell of a run accelerating that business before selling it to Entrada.
And that's where when I met you as
Yep.
well. And was this around the time you launched your podcast?
It was, yeah. So I had a little bit of a like identity crisis because I'd spent 6 years really building a brand that was solely attached to G5. I was the evangelist for the business. That was not my title, but it was the role unspoken that I was in. I spoke at more than 60 conferences while at G5, traveled 150 plus thousand domestic miles a year, spent a lot of time just grassroots building a network, but on behalf and extension of G5. And Jonathan, I was like so worried that when I would go to Rent Dynamics, that my whole network would be like, hey, you can't just like change companies and be their biggest fan again. You've got to have something more to talk about than your business.
Mhm.
So in December of 2020, I had the idea, looked left and right, didn't see a lot of people creating content at the time on LinkedIn or on podcasts. So I decided to start something that was going to be my own, that could hopefully benefit my employer, that could hopefully benefit my career, but ultimately would give me something to talk about around the industry that I'm deeply passionate about. And it's been a really great vessel for communication, connection, networking. And I do think it's had material impacts for the businesses I've been a part of as well.
Absolutely. I can see the connection, right? And I think it's really interesting. How did I have to think that you were, if not the first, maybe one of the first, and maybe the most quick to rise podcast in multifamily. Where did you get the playbook for that?
I've had this like weird comfort, like where I'm just not scared to take the first step. I think a lot of times people overanalyze, they get into this like paralysis analysis where they just like overthink.
Mhm.
And I don't know if it's Nike, like just do it. And I don't know if it's
Mhm.
just being someone who's not afraid to scrape their knees. But I looked to podcasts like Mike Brewer's, like Multifamily Collective was very much alive and well still. He's definitely the OG. I was listening to a lot of podcasts at the time, and being a technical, it didn't really stress me out to think through, okay, I have to find a hosting platform, a recording platform, and buy a mic. So I had this like, hey, go from 0 to 1 as fast as possible. If no one listens to it, at least I can say I'm a podcaster. That's probably cool down the road.
Mhm.
And I think finding comfort in just like fast iteration early was just one of the things that helped me scale it really quickly. It's definitely been a fun project, but also a fun way to, as you've experienced, have other ways to connect with leaders in the space aside from just business.
And I think one thing that I'm excited for is as AI evolves, AI will consume all of this podcast data and make it more visible and searchable. And we might find that we get much more amplification in audience.
Yep.
And it's just going to be really interesting to see how this content can be used in other ways. Now, we've had conversations, Mike. There are you tons of podcasts in our space now. Do you still feel there's opportunities for podcasters to enter the multifamily podcast space, or do you think, or what would be the conditions where it could still make sense?
Yeah, I definitely do. And I think I spend actually more time than I should like talking about this with people, whether it's like getting active on LinkedIn. A lot of people
Mhm.
want to create brands, but they haven't yet. Whether it's the desire to create a content type platform, whether it's podcast or a video series, a lot of people will start, but very few people will follow through. You
Yep.
look at podcast data, it's about 45% of podcasts have less than 3 episodes. And that just like tells you that like starting isn't necessarily the risk anymore. It's actually
Mhm.
following through.
Right.
But the way I think about it is this, Jonathan, you've been to what, 50 plus technology conferences in your life, probably way more than that.
I Yeah, probably around 50. I'm thinking of a handful a year for the last 10 years. Sure.
So you walk into like, I'll use multifamily since we're in it. You walk into NA Apartmentalize
Yep.
and you see how hard people work to be able to get a captive audience in a session. And they're probably stoked if they get 100 people, maybe 150 people.
Yep.
And a lot of those people are their friends. They're not actually their customers. They're people that are there to support them. They're there because the session looked interesting. The way I think about it is this: if you have something to say, you have a point of view, and you can build a captive audience and get 50 people to tune in and listen to your point of view weekly, monthly, whatever the frequency might be, that are potential hires, potential customers, whatever the thing might be, why wouldn't you do that? And those are not hard to achieve numbers in virality on LinkedIn, in podcasting today. So I think building an audience is a huge unlock for people that are
Mhm.
aspirational in their careers or at the scale stage of their careers like you and I are. And I don't think it's too late to start, but I think what's important is that you find the niche. I think the riches are in the niches, and that's true. I think you have to make sure that you find a way to stand out with your own point of view, take, or whatever it might be.
Well said. Now let's go back to rent dynamics because I know the story here. The audience may or may not, but crazy ride as you scaled that business. And I know what happens at the end, but why don't you share a little bit more about that journey from 2020 to 24? Because I think this is really an interesting story.
Yeah, it was the ride of a lifetime. My wife and I moved our family to Utah in the middle of the pandemic, built a home during the COVID boom, which in hindsight was not the greatest decision, but we really like went for it. And Rent Dynamics is a beautiful business. It was founder led when I joined, had not raised very much outside capital, and ultimately had three distinct products that we sat on, spanning contact center, CRM, and a credit reporting product. And as a leadership team, we saw an opportunity to really accelerate credit reporting. Looking at the industry, ESG was on the rise, ancillary income still is important and top of mind for partners. We really made a decision to like really accelerate a singular product.
Mhm.
And it really had a massive impact on the business. It gave us focus. We weren't as distracted. And we really spent about 3.5 years really accelerating growth across all products, but really putting our energy into it to putting a moat around this one and scaled go to market pretty much from the ground up. Took it from 0 to 14 sales reps, built out a marketing function, a revenue operations function, rethought customer experience to be across the whole choreography of how the customer engaged with our business. And ultimately, we started due diligence looking to raise capital from some sort of private equity, maybe some venture money. And Entrada ended up being the top contender, and we sold 100% of the business to Entrada in July of 2023. We just celebrated 1 year, and it was their first acquisition. And
Wow.
they've now acquired their second company, Calling AI. So we were part of the playbook for the platform M&A approach that I think they're going to continue looking at.
Wow. Yeah, that really shook the industry when that transaction happened. I remember, yeah, Entrada, very much a heads down company and achieved great success. But for them to acquire somebody, that was very new for everyone.
Yep.
What was the acquisition process like itself? I'm not technically speaking, but just like what it took from of you and the executive team to get through that.
Yeah, due diligence was probably one of the hardest like chapters I've ever experienced in my life, personally and professionally. You think about working hard or working long hours, like you've not experienced stress like you experience with an 11 p.m. email from a lawyer saying you need to do something before midnight. And we were always on. It was 7 days a week for several months, but it was also like a heck of a team building experience as well. It was hard on the family because I was at the office all the time, but it was a really cool experience. I think I learned a lot about data and organization, learned a lot about storytelling because I watched our founder tell our narrative to all of the different potential investors or acquirers, and ultimately to have a front row seat to due diligence. Also, you think about pages in your personal career playbook, definitely a big one to be able to experience at that size and scale. But it was a cool process. It was a long process. It was much longer than our bankers ever told us it would be. But we had a great outcome, and it definitely was a really cool story to basically put a cherry on the bow for the chapter in Utah. It was definitely a really great experience.
And in the last few months, you've moved over to Apartment List. Tell us what attracted you to Apartment List, and what are you excited about for leading this company at this stage?
Yeah. So I joined Apartment List April 15th of this year. So it's been just over 100 days. Took a couple months just to dabble, decide. I thought about going solo. Consulting and that like aspect of my career is definitely like, really interesting to me. But ultimately, like I have a desire to lead and I like to operate. And I boiled it down to three things that I really wanted in my next adventure. And I was fortunate to be able to talk to a lot of companies about said adventure. The first is I really wanted to be back in the marketing arena. I really wanted to be back in marketing. The second is I wanted to be operating a bigger revenue business. I just wanted to get the higher stake operating experience. And then the third thing is I wanted to join a business that I felt like had a 10x market opportunity and growth, because growth has been the name of the game in my career. It's been a fun, hard part of where I've spent my time. And when I met Matthew Woods, the CEO, ultimately the board, much of the team, it was just like check across the board. So it's a beautifully complex business, very well run. We're remote first. It's my first time ever working for a remote business. So now I have the beautiful fortune of doing what I love and living where I love. We're back in Bend, but feeling tons of gratitude about this next chapter.
Wow, remarkable. So much to unpack there. We've concluded the career journey on paper discussion. I always like to ask guests on this show, what advice would you give to up and comers in our industry? We get asked offline quite a bit, but I love to surface the gems of advice that folks should know if they want to end up in a position like you in the C suite of an important multifamily company.
Yeah, I'll try to be succinct here and I'll try to find the right balance between confidence and whatever the other word might be. But I look back at the last 10 years, Jonathan, I've not applied for a role since 2015. And I think one of the first pieces of advice that I would give to anyone in any sector of their career is to invest in your network early and often. I think too many people, we see it on LinkedIn, we see it in our DMs, we see it in our phone calls all the time. Too many people wait until they need their network to invest in it.
Mm.
And what I have found, like time and time again, is the more that I give to my network through my time, my ideas, my perspectives, my content, my lessons, my learnings, whatever the thing might be, the easier it is for my network to be there when I have an ask of my network. And so I think investing into your network early and often will set up an ability for you to have much more strength when your network needs to be called on, whether it's for your next opportunity, your next reference check, whatever it might be. But that is far and away the first place I would start. And I say it because of this. In 2015, when I joined G5, we were a team of misfits. We were a bunch of people who loved Bend, who really wanted to see this company work well. And if I look back to that class that I worked with from 15 to 18, I was there till late 20. CEOs of $30 million companies now that were my peers at the time, CMO of top 10 operators in multifamily, CXOs of $100+ million technology businesses, and full-time venture capital and private equity investors. So you just think about like building that network, but investing in it early is far and away the first thing I would share as impactful advice.
Wow. So those were all your contemporaries at G5? What was in the water in Bend, Oregon that, or what was the environment like that led so many of you all to such success in relatively short time? Because you're talking about going from 15 to 20, we're in year 2024. What was unique about that G5 experience that propelled so many people?
I think it's hard for a lot of us to remember what work was like before remote work was normalized. And in 2015, it was not normal to have remote first as an option at all. And I think one of the first things that I'd recall on is that a lot of people love living in Bend. And
Mhm,
so when you live in a place you love, oftentimes you're willing to take some sort of a compromise in what you do because you get to live in that place.
mhm,
So I think we had a lot of people that were potentially like overqualified for the work,
mhm,
but they really wanted to be in Bend. So you had a lot of really smart, really capable, really experienced people that chose living first and
mm.
then happened to find this like really cool entrepreneurial growth opportunity in G5. So I think it was a lot to do with the intersection of where we worked and where we lived. And
Hmm.
that kind of alumni list is pretty dang incredible. I still talk about it all the time.
That's remarkable. What about folks who are job seeking? We touched on it earlier. Tell us more. In this day and age, there's LinkedIn, there's other methods. Particular advice for job seekers. What would you offer?
Yeah, job seeking first and foremost is really hard right now. Like right now, it is definitely a market that favors the employer versus the job seeker. I just think that's just the reality of where we are today. Right now, if I look at like where our best applicants come from, where our best hires come from, people I'm helping get placed just about every week, I try to help someone get a job. Network first and foremost, like who do you know? I think the connection there, I think of it as a sphere of influence. Who can you find that knows someone in the new business? Think second degree connections. But the second thing is that I get a lot of outreach for people that say they want to work for me, and that's has been ever since I've been in sales. And it usually stops after one like relatively templated like message. And
Mhm,
I think you like permission to follow up for sure.
mhm,
Like follow up
mhm, mhm,
because I might get 150 applicants a day for a role. And so I'm overwhelmed because I'm getting a lot of applicants, a lot of DMs, a lot of messages. And one of the only ways to rise to the top is going to be through getting my attention
mhm,
or using your network, our mutual network, to get in front of me.
mhm,
And the third thing, like, would be give yourself some grace because it's a hard market and it can feel like you're failing right now as you jump into the space of trying to find a new job. But it really is a hard market right now, and I know a lot of people who it's taking 3, 4, 5, 6 months, but they have found
mhm.
something amazing. So patience, I do think, is worth sharing as well.
Yeah, and I have stories like that too, and folks that I know who have recently found things where it took up to a year,
Yep,
and it's I can't imagine just the mental game that plays on you,
totally,
right?
totally.
So stick it out. Good things happen with perseverance. That's good advice. Mike, I want to ask you more about your routine. You strike me as a still an athlete from I think before your Nike days and quite an athlete at that. So what does a week in the life of Mike Wolber look like?
So I'm a dad first and foremost. So at this point, I've got a 7-year-old and a 5-year-old. Time is fleeting. I give 8 to 5 every day to my team at work. And one of the things that's really become a big part of my routine ever since having kids is mic time. So up early, and I really try to prioritize the time where my family's sleeping. So in the morning, whether it's time for work or always time for fitness, this morning it was 4.5 miles on the trails right behind my house. Getting up early and doing something for myself before serving others, both family and colleagues, is a really important tone setter for me.
Mm,
So I always start outside with some form of sweat. Um, you'll see I spend a lot of time reading. I like to consume a lot. I think being a learn it all is a superpower at work,
mhm,
and I like to learn. And so I spend a lot of time listening to podcasts, reading, and trying to incorporate that into airplane time and things like that. And so I'm not great at it, but I'm trying to follow a important mantra of being where my feet are so I can close the laptop and enjoy my family, but when I'm working, when I'm not. And now that we're back in Bend, we're spending a lot of time outside. So family hikes, enjoying the outside, and really trying to find that perfect balance between working hard and living hard here in Bend.
That's great. And do you do competitive races?
So I've raced 10 Ironman triathlons, qualified for the Boston Marathon. I currently am not signed up for any races. I got really into weightlifting. I've gained a little bit of muscle and less endurance focused. But now that I'm back in Bend, I do plan to pick up the running shoes and like recommit. And my goal next year is to crack back into the half marathon distance. And my goal is to break an hour and 30 again next year at the Bend Half Marathon.
All right. Awesome, Mike. Mike, if anybody wants to get in touch with you, I think folks will know, but is LinkedIn the best way or is there an even better way?
Yeah, LinkedIn is the easiest way to find me, Mike Wolber. There's not many of us. And I also run a podcast, like you mentioned, Jonathan. So modernmultifamily.fm is the website to find the podcast, and we're on all major platforms, but I'm easy to find.
All right. Well, Mike, thanks again for coming on the show. Thanks for giving us all of your insight and your story. And I look forward to catching up with you in Bend, Oregon next month.
Yes, sir. Thanks a ton for having me, Jonathan.
Thanks for listening to this episode of Multifamily Excellence, brought to you by With Me. With Me is making lives better every day through convenient, technology-enabled amenities for the multifamily industry and beyond. If you like this episode, make sure to subscribe wherever you listen to your favorite podcasts.